When you get old, your eyes start to go. I love coming here to talk about history, and I love it because you like it. I love talking about history. And, you know, I no longer teach. I spent many years teaching. I no longer teach, so I don't really get the opportunity to talk about history as much as I'd like. And so this gives me the opportunity to revisit topics and subjects and events that I thought I knew, but when I revisit them and really read up more about them, I always learn new things, and I love to pass them on to you. And I was just walking around talking to people, and Miss Zobrak here, who taught for 50 years, 2nd grade through 6th grade, called me over and said, "I give you a passing grade." And I thought, that is so perfect. That's what I've been looking for. I have a tie on because I was at a remarkable event today. I think I mentioned it last time. Our 104-year-old Navy wave, Julia Parsons, passed away on April 18th. She was a code breaker, the last surviving code breaker from World War II. She was really a genius, went to Carnegie Tech. She wanted to be an engineer. Carnegie Tech didn't allow women to major in engineering then, and so she had to get a general education. She graduated in 1942. She joined the Waves, clearly demonstrated her smarts to the Navy, and they put her in a room in a secret location in Washington, D.C., where she was with 24 of the greatest mathematicians on Earth. And their job was to decode the German Enigma code, which was sent day and night, twice a day, from Germany to the U-boats or submarines in the North Atlantic. And her job was to decrypt Enigma. And she spent the last 15 years of her life, and she lived again to be 104 years old, telling the story of how Enigma was broken and the work that she did. And she really focused on girls in school and young women in college. And so over the past 15 years or so, when she learned that she could talk about it openly, that everything she had worked on was declassified, she really made it her mission to kind of keep the story alive and to pass the story on and to inspire especially young women, you know, to get involved in important business like she was involved in the Navy. So I think I mentioned this to you before, I would do programs with her a lot. We went to, in March, she turned 104 on March 2nd, and shortly after that birthday, she and I went to Bechtel Plant Machinery Incorporated in Monroeville. It's a Navy contractor. They have about 1,000 employees, and 350 of them, all engineers, crowded into a room, and she held court at age 104 for 90 minutes with them as I asked her questions, and she would kind of tell the story, and it was just right up to the very end. Because she was 104, her kids are older, and they live out of state, and there wasn't any memorial for her. So the Veterans Breakfast Club, and you know that's the organization I direct, we decided to hold a memorial tribute for her at the Heinz History Center. And we did some advertising for June 12th, which is Women Veterans Day. Because on June 12th, 1948, Harry Truman signed into law the Women Military Integration Act, which allowed women to be full members of the military. Before, they had been temporary members during the emergency of World War II, and then when the war was over, the expectation is they would leave. But the Women's Act, the Women's Integration Act, allowed women to participate in the military full-time, so we called June 12th Women Veterans Day. So we thought it would be a good day to pay tribute to Julia. And we contacted the Navy Recruiting Command, the Navy Reserve Center, the Navy ROTC here. They all showed up with a color guard. We had, her daughter came in to speak, her friends spoke. We played a 10-minute video of her and the work she did in World War II. It was absolutely, I mean, we had 200 people there. And I moderated or emceed or whatever you want to call it. And I was just so, I ended the day, or ended, you know, it was over by noon, and I just thought Julia would have loved this. I think it would have been perfect for her. So that's why I'm dressed up, and that's, she was inspiring me today as I was preparing to come to talk about Alexander Hamilton. I've been talking about Hamilton for months, it seems, and today the story ends, and it's not a good ending for old Hamilton, as you know. I have made the argument, which is debatable, very debatable argument, that Alexander Hamilton was the most important founding father. And that's very debatable. What I think is not debatable is he was the most vilified founder. He was disliked. Why did people dislike Hamilton? You name it. People disliked everything about the guy, especially his ideas. Hamilton pursued relentlessly a national agenda that most Americans hated. He envisioned a nation that would be a great global power, a sea power, a commercial power, with strong ties to Great Britain, with large manufacturing cities, with immigrants to work in factories, with a strong central government, and you know, all of this well funded by public debt and tariffs on overseas goods and all kinds of stuff. And none of this was acceptable to most Americans, 90% of whom were farmers, small farmers. And they were much more, they were much more attached to the Jeffersonian vision of America as a widely dispersed country, largely rural, largely agrarian, without large cities and without a strong central government. And so his ideas were odious to most Americans, and he wasn't shy about promoting his ideas. His personality was also odious to people. He was abrasive, he was arrogant, he was impolitic, he was undiplomatic, he was ambitious, nakedly ambitious, and people certainly didn't like that about him. The other thing that really grated was that he was successful. You know, that made it the worst thing about him. Is like he pursued this unpopular agenda and he got most of it through against all odds. How in the world did he pull this off? This was, I mean, the guy essentially took over the federal government and ran it under his command during the first Washington administration. And it absolutely bedeviled people. And what allowed him to get away with it were two not so secret weapons he had. Number one, he was in charge of by far the largest department of the new federal government, and that was the Department of the Treasury. Hamilton in New York and then Philadelphia had 39 people, staff members, reporting directly to him. Thomas Jefferson, who was Secretary of State, had 4 people reporting to him. And not only did Hamilton have those 39, Hamilton also had an army of over 1,000 people distributed through all 13 states, working for the Postal Service, which was then under the Department of Treasury, and working for the custom agencies, which also was in the Department of Treasury. These custom agents, these postmasters, the Revenue Cutter Service, now called the Coast Guard, that was also under the Treasury. So he had all these ship captains and all these postmasters and all these customs officials spread out around the nation, and they were his eyes and ears, and through them he helped to consolidate power in the Washington administration. So much so that the other cabinet members and the Attorney General felt like they could not do their job because Hamilton was doing their job. Hamilton was the Secretary of the Treasury, but in his spare time, he conducted secret diplomacy with Europe. He actually sent diplomats to Europe to negotiate treaties. That was Jefferson's job, but Hamilton was doing it. Hamilton was creating a legislative agenda for the president, a legal agenda. And this was just so difficult for especially his greatest adversary, Thomas Jefferson, to handle. Jefferson just grated against Hamilton for years and tried to counter Hamilton's success. The other not-so-secret weapon that Hamilton had was his strangely close relationship with George Washington. George Washington was the one American who loved Hamilton, you know? It was odd for Jefferson and others to see how close these two were. There was even a rumor circulating around the nation that Hamilton was Washington's illegitimate son. Because Washington didn't have any children, Hamilton didn't have a father, and so Washington was the father figure in Hamilton's life, and Hamilton was definitely the son that Washington never had. And it just the same pattern played out in these debates. Hamilton would propose something outlandish, you know, like the report on public credit or the report on manufacturing. He'd propose, you know, using federal money to subsidize industry in cities, something absolutely outlandish. And Washington would take it seriously. And Jefferson would object, and Washington would say, well, write your objections down and send them to me. Jefferson would, then Hamilton would write a 150-page book countering Jefferson, and most of the time, Washington would fall on Hamilton's side and would endorse the agenda, and it would barely pass Congress. And that's how Hamilton kept winning in Congress. And it absolutely drove Jefferson nuts. And Jefferson wrote letter after letter to Washington, trying to convince Washington to get rid of this guy, you know, trying to break the spell that Hamilton seemed to have over Washington. There was one famous letter that he wrote May 23rd, 1792, where he listed 21 reasons why you can't trust Alexander Hamilton. Went down reason after reason, and this is kind of how he summed it up. This corrupt squadron's ultimate object, and the corrupt squadron is the Treasury Department. This corrupt squadron's ultimate object is to prepare the way for a change from the present Republican form of government to that of a monarchy, of which the English Constitution is to be the model. So there it is. Jefferson laid out that Hamilton was a subversive who wanted to return essentially the United States to British control under a monarchical government. You know, cannot be trusted. But Washington just couldn't turn against Hamilton. And it drove Jefferson crazy, and the musical does a really good job of, I think, portraying this conflict. Here's the man who played Jefferson in the musical Hamilton, and there are two songs that deal with Jefferson's frustration with Washington's relationship with Hamilton. And this is one of them. It must be nice to have Washington on your side. And I have some of the lyrics here. I removed the obscenities from the lyrics. You want to see the obscenities? She does. It must be nice to have Washington on your side. Thanks to Hamilton, our cabinet's fractured into factions. We smack each other in the press and we don't print retractions. The way he primps and preens and dresses like the pits of fashion, our poorest citizens, our farmers, live ration to ration as Wall Street robs them blind in search of chips to cash in. Somebody give me some dirt on his vacuous mask so that we can at last unmask him. I'll pull the trigger on him. Someone load the gun and cock it. While we were all watching, he got Washington in his pocket. Look in his eyes and see how he lies. Follow the scent of his enterprise. Oh, this immigrant isn't somebody we chose. Oh, this immigrant's keeping us on our toes. Oh, now follow the money and see where it goes, because every second the treasury grows. Oh, and if we follow the money and see where it leads, get in the weeds, look for the seeds of Hamilton's misdeeds. Still, it must be nice to have Washington on your side. So this is, Jefferson and the Jeffersonians were sure, they were certain that Hamilton was corrupt. They were certain that he was stealing money, skimming money from the treasury. I mean, if you think about the kind of, I've made the argument that Hamilton was one of the top 3 financial geniuses in the world, not just in the United States. He understood arcane financial transactions and kind of sophisticated financial instruments that nobody else understood. And because he lived in this world and was constantly doing these big deals with lenders and investors, they were certain that he was funneling money to his friends or taking some of, using his knowledge to enrich himself somehow. They just needed to catch him at it. And one of the ways that Jefferson tried to catch him was by publicizing what Hamilton was doing in this newspaper, which Jefferson created, called the National Gazette. The National Gazette existed for one reason only, and that was to destroy Hamilton. Jefferson didn't write for it. He would never sign his name to an article, but he hired people to write the articles for him, and he told them what to write. But he would not expose or put his own words on the record against Hamilton, but he wanted to make sure that, that Hamilton's supposed misdeeds were always before American eyes. And through the National Gazette, the Democratic Republicans, which was Thomas Jefferson's party, the first political party that was created to destroy Hamilton, the Democratic Republicans rallied around 2 scandals they were sure they could use to bring down Hamilton. One scandal was a sex scandal, which is my favorite kind of scandal. The second scandal is a money scandal. The sex scandal, oh man, what a story. The sex scandal is fairly straightforward, but it has some twists and turns. It was called the Maria Reynolds affair. There was a movie made of it in 1931, before the Hollywood Production Code. When the Hollywood Production Code, which I think was 1934, that you couldn't swear in movies, you couldn't show nudity in movies after 1934. Before 1934, you could, and it did. And that's why it was a popular movie. It was called Alexander Hamilton, and it really focused on his relationship with a young woman named Maria Reynolds. Let me tell you the story. It's the summer of 1791. Hamilton is, of course, married with a family. His wife, Eliza Schuyler Hamilton, is living in Albany, New York, with the family. Hamilton is down in New York, Philadelphia, and working in the summer of 1791. And a young woman walks into his office, 23 years old, and she tells him a sob story. My husband is abusive. I'm running away from him back to my family in New York, but I don't have money to get there. Could you lend me money to get to New York? And he says, sure. I'll meet you at your place tonight and give you the money. So he shows up at her place, and we know, by the way, we know all the details of this relationship because Hamilton wrote about the details in great detail. He wrote we know everything about the relationship. So we know that he went to her place that evening. He brought the money for her, and then he wrote, some conversation ensued from which it was quickly apparent that other than pecuniary consolation would be acceptable. So she led him into the bedroom and they had sex. And that started this affair between the two of them that lasted through the summer and into the fall. And then in December, Hamilton, gets this letter from Maria Reynolds. And the only reason I'm showing it to you is I want to show it to you just as she wrote it, just as she punctuated it, which means she didn't punctuate it. You know? It's clear just by reading a couple lines of this that Hamilton didn't like Maria for her brains. This is what she wrote. I have not time to tell you the cause of my present troubles, only that Mr., her husband James Reynolds, has wrote to you this morning, and I know not whether you have got the letter or not. And he has swore that if you do not answer it, or if he does not see or hear from you today, he will write Mrs. Hamilton. He has just gone out, and I am alone. I think you had better come here one moment, that you may know the cause. Then you will the better know how to act. Oh my God, I feel more for you than myself, and wish I had never been born to give you so much unhappiness. Do not write to him, no, not a line, but come here soon. Do not send or leave anything in his power. So what she's talking about is this. She says that James Reynolds, her husband, found out about the affair and wrote to Hamilton a letter, which he did receive. And this is the letter he received. And the letter was an extortion letter. It was this: I have this proposal to make to you, Hamilton. Give me the sum of $1,000, and I will leave the town and take my daughter with me and go where my friend, Maria, his wife, shan't hear from me, and leave her to yourself to do for her as you think proper. That's what James Reynolds wrote to Hamilton. Essentially, he's saying, give me $1,000. You give me $1,000, you get to keep my wife. And I'll get out of your hair. So Hamilton paid him $1,000. And this is what I don't totally understand about this whole thing, is Hamilton pays James Reynolds $1,000 so that Reynolds won't expose the affair. And then Hamilton continues to see Maria. He didn't break it off with Maria. Men are idiots. You know, he should have walked away, but he didn't. He kept on having the affair. I guess he figured he paid for it. So he kept on having the affair. And James Reynolds continued to be annoying. He didn't just disappear. Instead, he would nickel and dime Hamilton and say, I need $30 here, I need $40 here, pay up, buddy, that kind of thing. And then the following year, in November 1792, Hamilton gets a letter from James Reynolds in jail. Reynolds was caught conspiring to cash in the death benefit of a Revolutionary War veteran who was not dead. He was taken to jail, and he wrote to Hamilton and said, get me out of here. Hamilton ignored the letters. And so James Reynolds figured, I will write to Hamilton's adversaries and see if they're interested in what I know about Hamilton. So he wrote a letter to James Monroe, who was at that time, he would later become our 5th president. At that time, he was a congressman from Virginia. And he said, I have stuff to tell you about Hamilton. Come to jail and visit me. I'll tell you all I know. James Monroe went to see James Reynolds in prison, and he brought with him 2 of his Democratic Republican colleagues, one of them Frederick Muhlenberg from Pennsylvania, and one of them Abraham Venable also from Virginia. And they went and they asked James Reynolds, what's your story? And he told them a tale. He said, Hamilton came to me and threatened me and stole my wife, and he assaulted me and said he would ruin my life. He had an affair with my wife, and then said that I had to follow his orders or he would ruin me. And he ordered me to concoct this scheme to cash in the death benefit of a Revolutionary War veteran who was not dead. And so this was all Hamilton's idea. He put me up to it, and you need to expose it. And then he said, James Reynolds said, to prove the case, to prove to you that what I'm saying is true, I present to you letters that I have in Hamilton's handwriting to Maria. And they are steamy. They're the love letters. They give them to Monroe. Monroe reads them and believes that they're genuine. He asks James Reynolds, can I keep these letters? And James Reynolds says yes. So James Monroe takes the letters. He then goes and meets with Hamilton, and he says, listen, this is what I learned from Reynolds. He says that you had an affair with his wife, and that you threatened him, and that you put him up to this whole scheme, this theft scheme. And Hamilton responded with complete and total honesty, as he often did. And he said, well, I did have the affair, for sure. but I paid the guy $1,000 because he was extorting me, and I never told him to do anything illegal. Like that's not part of the story. And Monroe believed him. Monroe said, "Okay, I believe you. We will no longer. You will never hear. We will never bring this up again. Your secret is safe with us." But the one thing that Monroe did that I'm sure Hamilton wished he hadn't done is Monroe took back the letters that Hamilton wrote and kept them. That was such a mistake. Such a mistake. Hamilton should have kept those letters so that they couldn't be used against him in the future, and they would be used against him in the future, and I'm going to tell you how. With the sex scandal apparently off the table, the Democratic Republicans pursued a money scandal, and this was straightforward. This came to light in what's known as the Giles Resolution, named after this man, William Giles, who was he was like Thomas Jefferson's attack dog in Congress. And in January 1793, Giles proposed a resolution saying that he had proof that Alexander Hamilton stole money from a loan from France to the United States, a $1.5 million loan, that Hamilton stole the money, kept some of it, and distributed the rest to his friends. And for this, he should be impeached. This was the first step towards a removal or an impeachment process. And the resolutions had resolved that the Secretary of the Treasury has been guilty of maladministration in the duties of his office and should, in the opinion of Congress, be removed from his office by the President of the United States. Giles and the Democratic Republicans were counting on the fact that Hamilton, let's see, how do I say this? Hamilton wouldn't be able to prove a negative. I've heard that it's hard to prove that you didn't do something. It's harder to prove that you didn't do something than that you did do something. And considering that he had only 6 weeks until Congress was at recess in March 1793, Giles and the Democratic Republicans were sure that Hamilton would not be able to clear his name in 6 weeks and give proof that he hadn't skimmed from this loan from France. And George Washington, the groundswell of opposition to Hamilton would become so great that Washington would have no choice but to dismiss Hamilton. They underestimated Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton, I've said it before, he was one of the hardest, if not the hardest working founder. But that's not quite accurate. Hamilton was maniacal in his work. He was beyond a workaholic. I think he had some kind of manic disorder. I really do. Because there's so many cases of him kind of staying up 72 hours to write something. And, he would barely sleep, he would barely eat. There's lots of evidence that he would remain in the same clothes for days on end. He wouldn't bathe. He would get on something and not let it go until he finished it. Well, that's what he did with this. In response to this accusation, Alexander Hamilton wrote a 200-page book in 6 weeks. The book was a full accounting of all the money that had come into the federal government and had gone out. It was an audit with charts and graphs and appendices, and when he presented it to Congress, it took their breath away, and they could do nothing but exonerate him. It was so obvious that he knew where every dime of the federal budget was spent, and that he could prove it. It was an extraordinary feat, but just another in a long line of extraordinary feats that Hamilton had achieved like that. Intellectual feats, you could say. Hamilton exonerating himself from the money scandal, him being cleared apparently of the sex scandal, that meant that Jefferson had nothing left against Hamilton, and Jefferson resigned from George Washington's cabinet in protest. He said, I could no longer do my job. I could never do my job to begin with. Everything I do is undermined by Hamilton. I have no influence or power in this cabinet. I will be more effective outside of the system. So he resigned as Secretary of State, and Hamilton followed suit. Hamilton also resigned in 1795. And Hamilton figured he had achieved almost everything that he had wanted to achieve. He wasn't going to achieve anything more. He was a lightning rod for Washington, and he knew that Washington suffered because of Hamilton's unpopularity, so he thought he would get out of Washington's hair and resign. And then also, Hamilton was a really great attorney, and he wanted to make a lot of money in New York City as a lawyer. So he thought, the time was right in 1795 to resign, and he did. So now, by 1795, you have Hamilton out of office, out of government, and you have Jefferson out of office, out of government. And if you thought that they clawed at each other when they were both cabinet members together, it was nothing compared to what they did to each other when they got out of office. Because now they were no longer bound by the forbearance that you have to show to a fellow cabinet member in the George Washington administration. Now they were unshackled by any kind of decorum, and they just went at it. And Hamilton, unlike Jefferson, Hamilton signed all his opinion pieces about Jefferson. He was very public about saying that what he thought about Jefferson. And what Hamilton did was, very gingerly at first, begin to reveal something about Jefferson that most Americans suspected, but few ever said out loud. And that was, Jefferson was probably having sex with his slaves. That was the rumor that was going around. And that demonstrated that Jefferson was a hypocrite. This great romantic poet of democracy, Thomas Jefferson, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence. The high-minded Jefferson actually was a bratty, rich aristocrat who exploited people. That he was not the person he seems. And this is a somewhat typical, you have to kind of, he's saying this in kind of flowery 18th century language, but this is essentially what he's revealing about Jefferson here. He's trying to describe Thomas Jefferson. The externals of simplicity and humility afford but a flimsy veil to the internal evidences of aristocratic splendor, sensuality, and Epicureanism. And Epicureanism is an 18th century term for hedonism. So Jefferson pretends to be a simple, plain Republican gentleman farmer, when really he's an aristocrat living a hedonistic, kind of ancient Roman kind of life. And that was the accusation. Jefferson started giving back, of course, not with his name, but in the name of other writers. And Jefferson's favorite writer was a guy named James Callender. Callender. Ooh, so little is written about him, and he's really important. There should be more about him. I don't think there's a biography out there. James Callender was a Scottish immigrant. He was a great writer, terrible human being, and he was a hired gun. People would hire him to destroy other people in print, and he was really good at it. And in 1797, James Callender was paid by the Democratic Republicans to write this book called The History of the United States for 1796, including a variety of interesting particulars relative to the federal government previous to that period. And in this book, which became a bestseller in 1797, in this book, James Callender reveals to the world Alexander Hamilton's affair with Maria Reynolds. Oh. And he does it in great detail. He quotes extensively from that stack of letters that James Monroe had taken with him and clearly had given to Callender, or Jefferson had given them to Callender, because they were quoted verbatim, page after page, and the American people read it and were absolutely fascinated by it. He says this: "We now come to a part of my work, more delicate perhaps than any other, where we will see this great master of morality, Alexander Hamilton, though himself the father of a family, confessing that he had an illicit union with another man's wife. I feel I must expose these papers to the world. Not a word has been altered." So he exposes the affair, and then he ends the story with an accusation. And that's this: Hamilton was extorted by Maria Reynolds' husband, James Reynolds, for $1,000. If you give James Reynolds $1,000, he will be quiet about the affair. And Hamilton took that money, $1,000, from the federal treasury and gave it to James Reynolds. Hamilton read the book. He said, he's quoted as saying something like, "They got 95% of it right. And boy, was that well written. But the 5% about me stealing the $1,000 from the treasury is wrong. Everything else is right. But I didn't steal from the treasury. That was my own money. I stole it from my wife," which he did. You know, it was my wife's money, and I took it from her without her knowing and used it to pay James Reynolds. And Hamilton felt that the accusation of theft was so great, it was so damaging, that he had to write an exoneration for himself. And so he went into his room, his drawing room, and he wrote a book. 95-page book. Pamphlet. It's called the Reynolds Pamphlet. The book is, you could Google it and read it online. The title really is Observations on Certain Documents Contained in Number 5 and 6 of the History of the United States for the year 1796, in which the charge of speculation against Alexander Hamilton, late Secretary of the Treasury, is fully refuted, written by himself. Hamilton took this approach. The only way people are going to believe me when I say I didn't steal the money is if I am 100% honest about the whole affair, and if I reveal all the details of my relationship with Maria Reynolds. And so he did. This book is really about his sexual relationship with Maria Reynolds. He talks about when they did it, where they did it, how they did it, how he hid it from his wife, how he got away with it for so long, and where he got the money, how he stole the money, how he's kind of passed it to Reynolds. He reveals he comes out, the book is a total cad. And then he says, "But I didn't take the money from the treasury. I took it from my wife. I took it from my family." And it worked. It was the best-selling book of 1797. Everybody read it. And everybody read it and they said, "You know what, that Hamilton, he's not so bad. I mean, he's a dirty rat, but he's honest about it, And it really helped. It absolutely protected him from the accusation that he had stolen. Of course, it discredited him in so many other ways. He would never be able to hold public office after this. But he did succeed in kind of clearing his name, and he writes this in the book. He says, "The charge against me is a connection with one James Reynolds for purposes of improper pecuniary speculation. My real crime is an amorous connection with his wife, for a considerable time with his connivance, with the design to extort money from me. This confession is not made without a blush. I can never cease to condemn myself for the pang which it may inflict in a bosom, his wife Eliza's, eminently entitled to all my gratitude, fidelity, and love. But that bosom will approve that even at so great an expense, I should effectually wipe away a more serious stain. The public too will, I trust, excuse the confession. The necessity of it to my defense against a more heinous charge could alone have extorted me so painful and indecorum. In other words, he had to clear his name from the heinous stain of being a common criminal by revealing what a philanderer he was. This was enormously painful, as you can imagine, for his wife, Eliza, and for his family, but that's it. He cleared his name, but it really was the nadir of his public career. He would never again be able to hold sway, or much sway, over the country, and he would never again be able to hold kind of public office. And so here he is, kind of at the bottom of his public career, when he devotes himself to his legal career and also to kind of saving and building up this political party that he had created. The Jeffersonians had created the Democratic Republicans to destroy Hamilton. Hamilton had created an opposing party called the Federalist Party, whose mission was to push Hamilton's agenda further down the road, the Federalists. And the Federalists were under attack, said Hamilton, from within, by somebody, used to be called a fifth column, by a subversive within the Federalist Party, who is trying to take the party away from the Hamiltonian vision. And Hamilton dedicated himself to saving the party from that subversive named Aaron Burr. Burr, what a fascinating person. Really one of our he was a founding father, but he's the founder we know least about, because he destroyed all his papers. He requested everybody he ever wrote a letter to read it and burn it. He said, only those with papers get remembered by history, and I do not want to be remembered by history. What an odd duck he was. And something appealing about him. I'm going to say something, I'm going to try to explain this because this is going to sound so counterintuitive or so even offensive. I think there's something appealing about Aaron Burr. There's something, as strange as it may say, because the founding fathers, for all their genius, and they were geniuses, they were really full of themselves. They were really narcissistic. They're always writing, Madison especially, they're always writing, what we say and what we do will be remembered by history. The whole world is watching us. Everything we do is important. We must keep every scrap of paper. And they're very self-conscious, Jefferson especially, about building their legacy to be remembered. So they destroy the things that they don't want to be remembered, and they leave the breadcrumbs that they want people to follow to, worship them later in history. Burr was not like that. Burr did not believe that what Americans were doing was special. He would say to his friends, we talk about this republic that we're creating, but really politics is politics no matter where you are. Whether it's a monarchy in England or a republic here in the United States, politics is about negotiating. It's about creating alliances. It's about undermining your adversary. It's about grabbing as much power as you can. It's a game. And he loved the game of politics. But it was a game. He really didn't believe in anything. He was something of a nihilist, which is so strange because he came from, there's very little on him. I think this is the only biography of Aaron Burr by Eisenberg, Nancy Eisenberg. There's just not much of a paper trail. Everything we know about Burr pretty much comes from other people, most of whom didn't like him. So we don't know that much about him. But it's so strange that he would be such an outsider among the founders because he came from such an eminent family. His father, one of the founders of Princeton University and president of Princeton University, Aaron Burr Sr. His mother's father was Jonathan Edwards, the greatest theologian in American history. He should have been one of our greatest founding fathers, but something was missing with him. Something very strange, kind of a moral quality that was lacking in Aaron Burr. There are really two ideals or two things he really believed in that he went on record for. One, and this is odd, he was super anti-slavery, more than any founder. He really hated slavery and didn't believe in it. The second thing was much more controversial, and he was much more outspoken about it, and he was just ridiculed endlessly for it. He believed in, get this, female equality. Yeah, I know. What a wacko. He loved his wife, Theodosia, and he would say to her, like, too bad you're a woman, because you're so much smarter than I am. You're so much more capable than I am. You should be president of the United States. I shouldn't be a senator. I shouldn't be an attorney general. I shouldn't be a general in the army. You should have done all that because you're totally capable of being that. And he believed that. He believed that women should be full citizens of the United States. They should be able to vote. They should be able to hold office. They should be able to do all the things that men are able to do. And Theodosia and Burr, they got married. They had one daughter, also named Theodosia, whom they raised with all of the benefits that a man would have enjoyed. She got a classical education. She was taught how to ride and how to hunt, how to shoot. She got a military training. I mean, she was raised, and Burr said he hoped that by the time Theodosia was an adult, women might have some rights so that she could exercise the powers that he felt had been, endowed to her. So this was unusual about him. And why did Hamilton hate Burr so much? He didn't trust Burr. He thought Burr was conniving. They were attorneys. They were the two most popular and best attorneys in New York City. And I think that was a big part of the problem, is that New York wasn't big enough for the both of them. Hamilton couldn't get out of bed and go out onto the street without seeing Aaron Burr. I mean, when Hamilton's father-in-law, Philip Schuyler, ran for Senate, who was his opponent? Aaron Burr. When Maria Reynolds had to hire an attorney to divorce her husband, who did she hire? Aaron Burr. When Hamilton and James Monroe almost went to a duel, who interceded and created a peace? Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr, Aaron Burr, Aaron Burr. Always there and always kind of on the other side of Hamilton. In 1800, you'll remember, what an important election. Aaron Burr ran as Thomas Jefferson's running mate in 1800. The vote was cast, the vote went through the Electoral College, and lo and behold, a mistake was made. Both Burr and Jefferson came out tied as winners in the Electoral College. How did that happen? Burr had something to do with it. Burr had somehow turned an elector, given electors some bad information so that he would get an extra vote in the Electoral College. And in that case, when there's a tie in the Electoral College, the vote is thrown into the House of Representatives, and the House gets to vote. And Burr, during this period, when the vote was thrown into the House of Representatives, Burr went around to the representatives and said, to the Federalists, and said, if you vote for me, I'll govern as a Federalist. I'll switch parties, and I'll be president, and you'll have the White House, and you'll keep the White House from Thomas Jefferson. And a lot of Federalists were tempted by this because they hated Jefferson. And Hamilton went to each one of those Federalist congressmen and said, don't do it. Yes, Jefferson is awful, but he's the devil we know. We don't know where Burr is going to take the country. Burr has no principles. He has no character. He has no honor. And he'll destroy the country. We're better off with Jefferson. And Hamilton's last-minute plea did throw the vote to Jefferson, and Jefferson became our president, our third president in 1800. Aaron Burr then was his vice president. And as Burr is vice president, remember, they both ran as Democratic Republicans. But during after losing this bid to become president, Aaron Burr, as vice president, switched parties. He became a Federalist as a vice president. And he decided he was going to run for governor of New York as a Federalist. Here's what he had cooking up. He made the argument to the Federalist Party, and he was right. He said, my boss, Thomas Jefferson, just made the Louisiana Purchase, all this land in the West. That land in the West dooms the Federalist Party. The Federalist Party only exists in New England, parts of Pennsylvania, and parts of New York. The only way the Federalist Party will survive in the future is to split from the United States of America, secede, and form its own country, joining with Nova Scotia, and, if we're lucky, New York. If you elect me governor of New York, I will lead New York out of the United States and into what he called the Northern Confederation. That was the plan for the election of 1804, the gubernatorial election of New York in 1804, to split New York and then have New York join New England, hopefully get Pennsylvania, or at least half of Pennsylvania, on board, to split from the country and form their own nation, their own new nation, with Burr as dictator. And Hamilton caught wind of this, of course, and he backed, Hamilton did, Burr's Democratic-Republican opponent in this election. And he wrote to a friend of his, John Trumbull, who was going up to Boston for the Federalist Party convention to vote on the direction of this country. And he said, you are going to Boston. You will see the principal men there. Tell them from me, at my request, for God's sake, to cease these conversations and threats about a separation of the Union. It must hang together as long as it can be made to. And once again, Hamilton's convinced enough Federalists to turn against Burr. Burr did lose that gubernatorial election in 1804. Hamilton triumphed. So the two men just went at it. I mean, just like Hamilton and Jefferson had gone at it, Hamilton and Burr went at it, except it was mostly Hamilton going after Burr. Hamilton had been writing against Burr, calling him every dirty word in the book, for 13 years, from 1791 to 1804. Just constantly, Burr is a thief, Burr is a liar, Burr is the Antichrist, Burr, he calls him every kind of name you could imagine. Very little from Burr against Hamilton. And in fact, Burr's friends said Burr liked Hamilton and could never understand what the problem Hamilton had with him was. And so, Burr, to him it was all a game. He didn't take it personally. It was like water off a duck's back, all this criticism being hurled at him from Hamilton. But then in 1804, Hamilton was reported to have used one word to describe Burr that Burr could not take. And historians have studied the meaning of this word ever since. What did this word mean? And here's the word: despicable. Hamilton never said Burr is despicable. Here's how it was quoted. In a newspaper article, somebody, anonymous source, quoted Alexander Hamilton as saying, I have a despicable opinion of Aaron Burr. That was it. It was kind of hearsay. That's something that Hamilton had said. This word, despicable, got under Burr's skin so badly that Burr immediately wrote Hamilton a letter and said, look, you've been quoted as saying you had a despicable opinion of me. You have to take that back. You have to deny it. Just tell people you never said it, and we'll be good. Hamilton wrote back saying, well, I don't recall saying that. It's something that I might have said about you, and so no, I'm not going to deny it. And Burr wrote back. Back and forth. It was back and forth for months. Wrote back and said, look, then if you did say it, just explain what you mean by the word despicable. And Hamilton wrote back, well, I don't know what it means. Who knows what it means? It could mean anything. And again, I didn't say it, but I might have said it, and I certainly won't take it back. I mean, you know, Burr is giving Hamilton every out. Here's what most historians think the word meant, or what Hamilton was, or what was being inferred by the American people from the word. Despicable in the 18th century had a connotation of sexual depravity. And Hamilton was starting to spread a rumor that Burr had an incestuous relationship with his daughter Theodosia. And that was something Burr could not stand. He could not allow it to stand. And so finally, after a lot of back and forth and the refusal of Hamilton to back down, Burr said, you know, I have no choice now but to challenge you to a duel. And they are the perfect people to fight a duel in 1804. Dueling was not super popular in America in 1804. It had been on the decline for generations, and it would continue to decline until it was finally snuffed out at about the Civil War. But people still did it. It was very old-fashioned. Preachers preached against it. Respectable gentlemen, you know, wouldn't do it. Respectable people didn't duel. People who weren't respectable and who had fallen a few notches in public esteem, they were the ones who tended to duel. Because dueling was not about hurting or killing your opponent. Dueling, in the purest sense, was not an act of violence. Here's what dueling was. Dueling was supposed to be a demonstration that you had such character and honor, you were willing to die to defend your honor and a principle. And that's it. You are willing to risk death to demonstrate your honor. And in a world without credit checks, in a world without Experian, and what are the other credit agencies? Equifax, you know, in the world without background checks, being able to demonstrate your honor is really important if you want to get a loan, if you want to go into business with somebody, if you want to get married to somebody. You know, you have to demonstrate your character and your honor in a public way. So these are people so desperate with no other way really to demonstrate that they were worthy of public esteem than to put themselves at risk for death. And here was the bargain that you made with the person that you dueled with. Here's the bargain. The bargain was this. You will point a gun at me. You will try not to kill me, not to hit me, but you'll come close. And the closer you come without killing me or hurting me, the more esteem I get from the duel. And then I will do the same for you. So in other words, here's an example. Earlier, Aaron Burr had a duel with John Church, who was Alexander Hamilton's brother-in-law. And the two of them dueled. Burr shot at Church and missed, but it was close. Church shot at Burr and hit his coat and put a hole in the coat. And that was the best duel ever, because Burr had a coat to show off. Look how honorable I am. This is how close I came. You know, but neither of them got hurt. And that's kind of what you were supposed to do. If you killed your opponent, that was bad. That showed that you were dishonorable. You were selfish. You were passionate. You were trying to take revenge on your opponent. It was really all about your honor to stand and take the shot rather than trying to kill your enemy. Hamilton, accepted the duel, and before the duel began, he wrote his final words to his family. And it's a great sermon that he wrote. It's pretty much a sermon against dueling. Dueling is stupid. Dueling is savage. Dueling is backward. Respectable people don't duel. Don't you ever duel, he told his family. Nobody in their right mind would ever duel. You know, the Christian religion preaches against dueling. He just went through how bad dueling was. And then he said, but I'm going to duel anyhow. And the reason I'm going to duel, he says, is I don't believe in all this honor stuff. I don't believe in the whole code and all that. That's a bunch of baloney. The only reason I'm doing it is because, like, I want to have influence over this nation again, and I can't without dueling. He said this, all the considerations which constitute what men of the world denominate honor impressed upon me a peculiar necessity not to decline the call. In other words, he doesn't necessarily believe in honor, but he knows that most men do. The ability to be in future useful would probably be inseparable from a conformity with public prejudice in this particular. So he's going to bow to the public demand that he does submit himself to a duel, just so that he could maybe hold public office in the future. So he agrees to the duel. The two men row across the Hudson River separately to Weehawken, New Jersey, from Manhattan. Burr arrives with his assistant in a rowboat. Then Hamilton arrives with his assistant. I think they had to come from New York because you can't get to this dueling ground anywhere else. I think you can't come from the west because there are palisades there. I think you have to arrive to this flat level dueling ground, which is still there, and they have a statue of Hamilton right there. They arrived, they used these two pistols, which were chosen by Hamilton because he had been challenged. He got to choose the dueling pistols. These are smooth bored dueling pistols, wildly inaccurate, which helps with the duel. Because it's really like Russian roulette. You fire one of these things from a distance, you don't know if it's going to curve this way, curve that way, curve up, or curve down, or go straight. There's no rifling in it. So it can't, the ball just goes anywhere, spins anywhere. You don't quite know how it's going to end up. And that's part of the fun of a duel. So Hamilton, because they met, they did two coin flips. The first flip was who wants each side. Hamilton won that. The second flip was which assistant gets to call fire. Hamilton won that. So the two men, faced back to back. They took 10 paces away from each other. They turned toward each other. Their two assistants stood off to the side. One, Burr's assistant called present, which means present your pistol. And then the two assistants turned their backs because they didn't want to be a witness to murder in case somebody died. And then after they turned their backs, Hamilton's assistant yelled, fire. So we don't quite know what happens because there wasn't any witness who survived apart from Burr. But everybody agrees there were two shots. Most people agree Burr fired the first shot. And Burr's shot hit Hamilton right above the hip, right here in his abdomen. It went through it broke a rib. It shattered his liver and his diaphragm, also damaged his diaphragm, and then lodged into his spine, and he was immediately paralyzed and fell to the ground. Burr ran over to him and said, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And Burr's assistant grabbed him and said, "We got to get out of here. This guy's hurt." So he got him in a rowboat and took him across to Manhattan, and Burr went into hiding. Meanwhile, Hamilton gets loaded into a boat. Oh, and the word spread, and this has been something. Hamilton fired a shot. That seemed to be what people remembered. Hamilton fired a shot. And they seemed to remember him firing it up in the air. But they couldn't remember why. They couldn't remember if he did it before he was hit, or if he was trying to hit Burr and fell over. But the legend went down that Hamilton gallantly threw away his shot, deliberately did not fire at Burr, and spared Burr his life. I argue, if Hamilton truly, purposefully fired in the air, he was doing it as a sign of disrespect for Burr. He did not respect him enough to threaten his life. And he would get no honor. Burr would get no honor from such a duel. So Hamilton fires in the air, throws away his shot. Hamilton gets shot by the killer Burr. Hamilton is then rowed back over to Manhattan. He's taken to a house in Greenwich Village. He lingers for 31 hours. A priest refuses to give him the last rites, an Episcopal priest. Why? Because the Episcopal priest didn't believe in dueling. And Hamilton croaked, "What if I say I'm sorry?" The priest said, "Oh yeah, then we could do it. I'll give you the last rites." So he got the last rites and he died. The word spread throughout New York fairly quickly that Burr had deliberately used the duel to kill Hamilton, and Hamilton had gallantly spared Burr by firing into the air. That was the legend. I'm not sure if it's true. I am sure that Burr did not intend to kill Hamilton. There's no way he would have done that. It ruined Burr forever. And here's how it was reported the next day. Be it remembered that on Wednesday, the 11th day of July, 1804, General Alexander Hamilton, the most honorable and most beloved citizen of America, was murdered by Aaron Burr. Hamilton's death just elevated his esteem in the public mind, unlike anything he had done in life. The best thing Hamilton did for his reputation was die. Absolutely the best thing. And I think the musical captures this well. And I think there would be a great musical about Burr. This is one of the final numbers here. This is Aaron Burr speaking. History obliterates in every picture it paints. It paints me and all my mistakes. When Alexander aimed at the sky, he may have been the first one to die, but I'm the one who paid for it. I survived, but I paid for it. Now I'm the villain in your history. I was too young and blind to see. I should have known the world was wide enough for both Hamilton and me. And that's the way, I think that's a good place to end. I will be back 3 weeks from tonight, on July 3rd, Independence Day Eve, to give a history of the 4th of July. I'll see you then.